The iron cage stood defiant in Dustfield's main street, a stark testament to heartless exploitation. Within its rusted confines, a girl, barely 18, leaned against the cold bars, her tear-streaked face smudged with grime. A sign emblazoned with the words, "Property of Cornelius Vane, debt unpaid," hung above her head. Silas Thorne, a man seasoned by 45 years of life and hardened by its injustices, felt a familiar rage simmer within him. He reined in his horse before Macready's saloon, his calloused hands gripping the leather reins with a force that bleached his knuckles white. The girl, trapped and vulnerable, was a haunting echo of a past he desperately tried to bury for 2 decades. A small crowd had gathered, a morbid audience to the spectacle. Some jeered and mocked, others muttered in disapproval, but none dared intervene. Such was Dustfield, a town where moral courage conveniently evaporated when personal comfort was threatened. Silas dismounted, each footfall kicking up a cloud of dust, his gaze fixed on the cage. The girl's whimpers grew louder as he approached. Her dress was ripped at the shoulder, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone. Tangled blonde hair framed her gaunt face. She couldn't have weighed more than a wisp of smoke. "What's going on here?" Silas demanded, his voice a low rumble that cut through the murmur of the crowd. A wizened old-timer, his beard stained with tobacco juice, spat a brown stream into the dirt. "Mercy Whitlock owes Vane $200. Her pa borrowed it before he kicked the bucket, leaving her stuck with the debt. Vane's saying if she don't pay by sundown, she stays in that cage till someone buys her contract." Silas's jaw tightened. For a girl like Mercy, $200 was an insurmountable sum. It was more than most in Dustfield earned in a year. Silas knew the sinister implications of Vane's contract. Whispers told of young women vanishing into his empire of brothels and gambling dens, scattered across 3 territories. The girl's eyes met his, and in that instant, time seemed to hold its breath. Those eyes, so full of fear and yet holding a spark of defiance, were the mirror image of his daughter's, the daughter he had never held, never known. He had been too proud, too consumed by his own ambitions, to marry her mother when she carried his child, the daughter who succumbed to fever at the tender age of 3 while he chased shadows and nursed his own festering guilt. "Please," Mercy whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the afternoon air. "Please, mister, I ain't done nothing wrong." Silas reached into his worn leather billfold, his fingers tracing the edges of the meager contents. $23, every cent he possessed after selling his last herd. Enough to buy seed for the coming season, winter supplies, perhaps even fix the leaky roof of his cabin before the relentless rains arrived. But staring into those desperate eyes, eyes that held the ghost of his own child, Silas understood a profound truth that resonated with the force of a physical blow. Some debts couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Cornelius Vane, resplendent in a tailored 3-piece suit, swaggered towards the cage, a peacock flaunting its plumage. Gold teeth flashed in the sunlight as he surveyed his captive and her audience. "Well, well," Vane announced, his voice dripping with false affability. "It seems our little songbird has attracted quite the crowd. Any gentleman inclined to make an offer before I transport her to more profitable ventures?" In that moment, Silas made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. Unbeknownst to him, Cornelius Vane had been watching him as well, and the cruel smile that stretched across the loan shark's face hinted that this was about to become far more complex than a simple transaction. Silas stepped forward, his hand still resting on his billfold. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to mind his own business, to protect what little he had left. But those eyes, those damnable eyes that mirrored his lost daughters, held him captive, refusing to let him turn away. "I'll pay her debt," Silas declared, his voice resonating with a newfound resolve that silenced the crowd's murmurs. The laughter died instantly. Cornelius Vane's smile widened, revealing more of his gilded teeth. "Well now, Silas Thorne, the hermit of North Ridge, I wouldn't have pegged you for a philanthropist." Silas ignored the barb and deliberately unfolded his billfold, slowly counting the worn bills. The crowd surged forward, sensing the brewing drama. Mercy's hands gripped the bars tighter, a flicker of hope igniting in her weary eyes. $200, Silas stated, holding up the paltry sum. That clears her debt. Vane circled the cage, a predatory glint in his eyes, his expensive boots crunching on the parched earth. But you see, there have been adjustments to the terms. Interest, you understand, compounding daily. The debt now stands at $250. The word struck Silas like a physical blow. He watched as Mercy's face crumpled, the nascent hope extinguished in an instant. $50 more than he possessed. $50 that might as well have been $500. That wasn't the original agreement, protested the old-timer, his voice laced with indignation. You said $200 at sundown. Vane shrugged, adjusting his silk tie with a casual disregard. Business terms are fluid, subject to market fluctuations, and the girl is getting older by the hour, which naturally affects her value. Rage surged through Silas, a volatile force that had led him down dangerous paths in the past. He thought of his empty cabin, his failing ranch, the brutal winter looming ahead. He thought of his daughter, resting in the cold earth for 20 years. He thought of the promises he had broken, the words he had left unsaid. I'll work off the extra 50, Silas heard himself say, the words torn from his throat. Whatever you need done. The crowd shifted uneasily. Everyone knew the kind of work Cornelius Vane demanded from desperate men. Debt collection, intimidation, and deeds far more sinister. Vane's eyes gleamed with genuine interest. Fascinating, Silas Thorne offering his services. They say you killed 3 men in Abilene. They say you have fast hands and a slow conscience. Silas didn't deny the accusations. He couldn't. Those ghosts had haunted him for 15 years, whispering in his ear during the long, solitary nights on his ranch. Do we have a deal or not? Silas growled, his patience wearing thin. Vane approached the cage and ran a manicured finger along the bars, causing Mercy to flinch. Here's what I propose. You want this girl? You can have her. All debts cleared. But you work for me for 1 month, starting with a small collection job I have lined up for tomorrow. The trap was closing, and Silas felt its inexorable grip. Whatever task Vane had in mind, it wouldn't involve collecting overdue payments from shopkeepers. It would be the kind of work that stained his hands with blood and burdened his soul with further regret. But Mercy was looking at him again, her eyes pleading silently. The same eyes his daughter would have had if she had lived to 18, if he had possessed the courage to claim her when it mattered. 1 month, Silas conceded, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Vane produced a key from his vest pocket and unlocked the cage with a theatrical flourish. Welcome to freedom, my dear, and welcome to my employ, Mr. Thorne. I have a feeling this arrangement is going to be most interesting. As Mercy stumbled out of the cage, her legs unsteady, Silas reached out to steady her. She looked up at him, her eyes a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment, oblivious to the price he had just agreed to pay. Across the street, 3 men in black hats observed the exchange. A subtle nod from Vane confirmed Silas's worst fears. This was only the beginning. Mercy's legs gave way the moment she stepped onto solid ground. Silas caught her, her weight feather light in his arms. He could feel the sharp angles of her bones, the tremor of her fear. Up close, he saw the angry red welts on her wrists where the iron bars had chafed her skin. Easy now, he murmured, supporting her against his chest. You're safe now. But even as he spoke the words, Silas knew they were a lie. No one was safe in Cornelius Vane's world. The man didn't strike deals, he laid snares. And Silas had just walked willingly into the most elaborate trap of his life. Vane clapped his hands together as if concluding a theatrical performance. Touching reunion aside, we have business to discuss, Mr. Thorne. The girl needs a place to stay, and you need to understand your new obligations. The crowd was beginning to disperse, disappointed that the spectacle had ended. But the 3 men in black hats remained, leaning against the hitching post outside the sheriff's office, their presence a silent, ominous threat. Silas recognized them. hired guns with dead eyes and lightning-fast reflexes, the kind of men Vane employed when mere intimidation wasn't sufficient. "She's coming with me," Silas stated firmly, helping Mercy find her balance. "That was part of the agreement." Vane's laughter grated like shards of glass. "Oh, my dear fellow, you misunderstand. The girl is free to go wherever she pleases, but you belong to me for the next 30 days. Confusion clouded Mercy's face, replacing the brief flash of relief. "What's he talking about? What did you agree to?" Before Silas could answer, Vane produced a folded paper from his coat pocket. Even from a distance, Silas could see the official seals and witness signatures. The man had anticipated this, prepared for this exact scenario. "Your savior here has generously agreed to perform certain services for me," Vane explained, his tone dripping with patronizing condescension. "Collection work primarily. Sometimes people need a little encouragement to fulfill their obligations." The blood drained from Mercy's face. "You mean he has to hurt people because of me?" A knot of guilt twisted in Silas's gut. The girl wasn't merely grateful. She was horrified. She understood the true cost of her freedom, and the knowledge was eating her alive. "The first assignment is tomorrow morning," Vane continued, consulting a gleaming gold pocket watch. "Widow Patterson is 3 months behind on her payments. Her farm would fetch a handsome price if she were motivated to sell." Silas knew Martha Patterson, a woman of 70, struggling to work 40 acres alone since her husband succumbed to consumption. She likely owed Vane money for medicine or funeral expenses. The thought of terrorizing her filled Silas with disgust. But then he looked at Mercy, at the way she instinctively clutched her torn dress, at the slight limp she favored in her left leg. This girl had already endured hell, and he was the only shield standing between her and something far worse. "Where do I find her?" Silas asked, his voice barely audible. Vane smiled, a predatory expression of triumph. "Oh, you know where she lives, that quaint white farmhouse on Creek Road. But here's the interesting part. She's no longer alone. Her grandson arrived from Denver yesterday. A rather large fellow, I'm told. Used to be a lawman." In that instant, Silas understood. This wasn't simply about collecting a debt. Vane was testing him, probing the depths of his depravity, measuring the extent of his willingness to inflict pain. If Silas refused, or if he faltered, he had a chilling premonition that the iron cage would be the least of Mercy's worries. The ride to Silas's ranch was the longest 3 miles of his life. Mercy sat behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her body trembling with exhaustion and lingering fear. Every few minutes he felt her shoulders shudder with silent sobs. "Why did you do it?" she whispered, as they crested the hill overlooking his property. "You don't even know me." Silas didn't respond immediately. How could he explain the guilt that gnawed at his soul, the daughter he had abandoned, the 20 years of regret that weighed on him like a mountain of stones? How could he articulate the connection he felt to this girl, a connection forged in shared loss and the desperate yearning for redemption? "Sometimes," he finally said, "a man has to do what he believes is right, even if it's foolish." The ranch house came into view, a modest wooden structure with a sagging porch and a weathered roof. It wasn't much, but it was built on honest labor. Now, that labor was about to be tainted by the venomous machinations of Cornelius Vane. As they drew closer, Mercy gasped, "Look, someone's been here!" Silas's blood turned to ice. The front door hung open, the hinges groaning in protest. His meager possessions were scattered across the porch, chairs overturned, debris strewn about. His rifle, usually mounted above the mantelpiece, was gone. The 3 men in black hats had moved with chilling efficiency. "Stay on the horse," Silas ordered, dismounting. He drew his sidearm, his senses on high alert. The interior of the house was a scene of methodical destruction. His mattress had been slashed, feathers swirling through the air like a blizzard. His meager food supplies had been emptied onto the floor, dishes smashed to shards. But this wasn't random vandalism. They were searching for something specific. "Looking for this?" a voice taunted from behind him. Silas whirled around, finding one of Vane's men standing in the doorway, casually holding a small wooden box. The man was tall and wiry, a jagged scar bisecting his left ear. His gun hung low on his hip, a silent testament to his lethal proficiency. "Name's Carson," the man said as if discussing the weather. "Mr. Vane sent me to deliver a message. It seems he neglected to mention one crucial detail regarding your arrangement." Silas kept his gun trained on Carson, but he hesitated to fire, not with Mercy standing so close outside. "What detail?" Carson opened the wooden box, revealing a faded photograph, the only image Silas possessed of his daughter's mother, Elena Vasquez. She was barely 16 in the photo, cradling an infant, the child who would die before her first birthday. "Funny thing about working for Mr. Vane," Carson continued, studying the photograph with feigned curiosity. "He likes to know everything about his employees, their histories, their regrets, their weaknesses." The implication slammed into Silas with the force of a battering ram. Vane knew about Elena, knew about the daughter, knew precisely which strings to pull to transform him into a puppet. "That girl out there," Carson nodded towards the door. "She reminds you of someone, doesn't she? Someone you failed to protect once before." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. "Get to the point." "The point is insurance," Carson said, carefully placing the photograph back in the box. "You carry out the job tomorrow, and you carry it out flawlessly. Otherwise, Mr. Vane will start asking questions around town. Questions about why a man like you lives alone. Questions about what happened to that Mexican girl who used to clean house for the preacher. Questions about the baby that died so conveniently." The room seemed to tilt around Silas. Elena hadn't simply died of fever. She had been poisoned, murdered by the preacher's wife, who could not tolerate a Mexican woman in her home, especially one carrying a bastard child. Silas had long suspected the truth, but he had lacked the proof, the courage to seek justice. 20 years is a long time," Carson continued, his voice laced with venom. "But murder has no statute of limitations, especially when there's a witness willing to step forward." Silas felt the walls closing in around him. Vane didn't just want him as a hired thug. He wanted him as a slave, a man so deeply compromised that he could never refuse an order, never walk away. "If you were Silas Thorne, what would you do?" Carson asked, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Protect the girl outside, the one who reminds you of your dead daughter, or protect your own neck from the hangman's noose? Because tomorrow morning, when you knock on Martha Patterson's door, you're going to have to choose." From outside, Mercy called his name, her voice laced with fear. Carson smiled and tipped his hat. "Better make the right choice, Thorne. Mr. Vane doesn't believe in second chances." As Carson turned to leave, Silas realized that the trap was even more intricate, more diabolical than he had ever imagined. And somewhere in Dustfield, a 70-year-old widow was about to become the ultimate test of everything he claimed to hold sacred. That night, Silas sat on his porch, watching Mercy sleep in his bed through the open doorway. She had insisted on cleaning up the mess that Carson's men had created, working in grim silence until exhaustion finally claimed her. Now, she lay curled up like a wounded animal, one hand clutching the tattered quilt his mother had sewn 40 years ago. The wooden box sat heavy in his lap. Inside, Elena's photograph stared up at him, her eyes filled with trusting innocence. He had betrayed them, both of them. Their daughter Isabella had inherited those same dark eyes before fever took her at 3 years old, or so everyone believed. Silas knew the truth now. Agnes Holbrook, the preacher's wife, had poisoned them both. A little arsenic in the milk, a little more in the medicine, all because she couldn't bear the thought of a Mexican woman sullying her perfect Christian household. Agnes was still alive, still occupying the front pew every Sunday, still basking in the sympathy she garnered for her charitable work. Tomorrow morning, he faced an impossible choice. He could ride to Martha Patterson's farm and intimidate a helpless widow into surrendering her land, or he could refuse Vane's orders and watch as his reputation crumbled and Mercy paid the ultimate price for his defiance. "You're awake." Mercy's soft voice drifted from the doorway. She stood there, clad in his oversized shirt, her blonde hair cascading around her shoulders. "I can't sleep either." Silas closed the box and placed it on the floor beside him. "Just thinking." She walked onto the porch and sat beside him on the wooden step, leaving a respectful distance between them. "About tomorrow, about a lot of things." Silence descended upon them, broken only by the gentle chirping of crickets. Mercy gazed up at the stars that blanketed the Texas sky, her expression unreadable. "My daddy used to sit like this, just staring at nothing, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." "What was he like?" Silas asked, surprised by his own curiosity. "A good man, a weak man." Her voice was devoid of judgment, filled only with a quiet sadness. "He borrowed that money from Vane to pay for my mama's medicine when she got the lung sickness. She died anyway, and Daddy started drinking, started gambling, started making promises he couldn't keep." Silas felt a familiar pang in his chest. Men do stupid things when they're grieving. Is that what you're doing now? Something stupid because of grief? The question struck closer to home than he wanted to admit. Perhaps it was. Perhaps he was seeking a twisted form of atonement for the sins of his past. Mercy turned to face him fully, her gaze piercing his soul. In the moonlight, she looked older, wiser than her 18 years. "That man today, Carson, he said something about you failing to protect someone before. Is that true?" Silas found himself pouring out his heart, revealing the secrets he had guarded for decades. He told her about Elena, about Isabella, about the 20 years he had spent carrying his guilt like shards of broken glass. He told her about the preacher's wife and the poison, about the justice that had never come. He told her things he had never spoken aloud to another living soul. When he finished, Mercy was weeping softly, but these weren't tears of fear or despair. These were tears of understanding, of empathy. "You think saving me will somehow save them?" she said quietly. "Maybe. And you think letting Vane use you will somehow balance the scales?" "I don't know what I think anymore," Silas confessed, his voice raw with emotion. Mercy reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and warm against his calloused palm. "My daddy thought the same thing. That he could work his way out of debt to Vane, that he could protect me by playing along with that man's games." "What happened to him?" The question hung heavy in the air. He put his gun in his mouth on a Tuesday morning when he realized the debt only got bigger, never smaller. "That's when I knew Vane doesn't want money. He wants souls." The truth of her words settled over him like a burial shroud. Tomorrow morning, Martha Patterson would be waiting in her little white farmhouse, unaware that her fate hung in the balance of a broken man's conscience. But as Silas looked at Mercy's face in the moonlight, he realized something profound. The daughter he had failed to save 20 years ago was gone forever. But this girl, this frightened, brave girl who had cleaned his ransacked house without being asked, she was still here. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Dawn arrived too quickly, its harsh light exposing the stark reality of his situation. Silas stood in his yard, saddling his horse, while Mercy watched from the porch. She had been awake when he rose, already dressed and making coffee, as if she belonged there, as if she were a part of his life. "You don't have to do this," she said for the third time, her voice pleading. "We could run, both of us, right now." Silas cinched the saddle tight and checked the cylinder of his sidearm. "Run where?" "Vane's got connections from here to El Paso, and Carson made it clear what he's capable of." "So you're really going to threaten an old woman?" The question hung in the air, as thick and suffocating as the smoke from a funeral pyre. Silas had wrestled with the same question all night, and he still didn't have a satisfactory answer. All he knew was that somewhere in Dustfield, Agnes Holbrook was probably preparing breakfast for her husband, 20 years after murdering his daughter and getting away with it. "I'm going to Creek Road," he said finally, meeting Mercy's gaze. "What happens there? We'll see." The ride to Martha Patterson's farm took 40 minutes, providing Silas with ample time to contemplate the multitude of ways this could all go wrong. He could refuse Vane's orders and likely end up dead, or framed for Elena's murder. He could intimidate Martha and succeed in forcing her off her land, adding another layer of shame to his already burdened conscience. Or he could attempt to find a third option, one that didn't seem to exist. The Patterson place sat nestled in a small valley, surrounded by cotton fields that had seen better days. The house was a white clapboard structure with green shutters, neat as a pin, but showing the inevitable signs of hardship and neglect. The barn needed new shingles, and the fence posts leaned precariously, like aging men struggling to stand against a relentless wind. As Silas approached, the front door swung open, and a woman emerged. Martha Patterson was smaller than he remembered, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her dress patched but clean. Behind her stood a younger man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable aura of a lawman. Silas's hand instinctively drifted towards his gun. "Mr. Thorne," Martha called out, shielding her eyes from the morning sun. "This is unexpected. You remember my grandson, Thomas. He's visiting from Denver." Thomas Patterson stepped forward, and Silas could discern the faint outline of a badge on his vest, where he usually pinned his star. The man's eyes were sharp and assessing, missing nothing and forgetting less. "Ma'am," Silas said, touching the brim of his hat. "Thomas, what brings you out this way?" Thomas asked, his tone polite but guarded, his hand hovering near his gun belt. This was the pivotal moment, the test that Vane had devised. Silas could deliver the message about the debt, play his assigned role in the ugly charade of intimidation, or he could shatter the script entirely. "I came to talk about Cornelius Vane," Silas said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. Martha's face paled. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "What about him?" "He's planning to take this place today. He'll probably claim your grandmother owes him money and that he wants the farm as payment." "That's absurd," Thomas snapped, his voice hardening. "Grandma doesn't owe anyone anything." But Martha was already shaking her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "The medicine," she whispered. "When your grandfather was dying, I borrowed money for medicine, laudanum for the pain. Vane said it was a loan." "How much?" Thomas demanded, his voice tight with suppressed anger. $50, but he says with interest it's nearly $200 now. A cold dread settled in Silas's stomach. The same trap that had ensnared Elena, the same web that had ultimately claimed Mercy's father. Vane didn't offer loans. He forged chains of enslavement. "There's more," Silas continued, steeling himself. "He sent me here to deliver the message, to ensure you understood the consequences of not paying." Thomas's hand tightened on his gun. "Is that a threat?" "No," Silas said, his voice laced with grim determination. "It's a warning, and probably the last good deed I'll ever perform." Even as he spoke, Silas saw dust clouds rising on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second. 3 riders were approaching fast, and he recognized Carson's lean silhouette in the lead. Vane hadn't trusted him to carry out the task alone. Insurance was on its way to guarantee that the message was delivered with maximum impact. "Get inside," Silas ordered, dismounting from his horse. "Both of you. Thomas, you might want to load that gun." Martha grabbed her grandson's arm, her face etched with fear. "What's happening? What did you do?" Silas glanced at the approaching riders, then back at the 2 people he was supposed to intimidate. People who were looking at him with trust instead of fear, even though he had just confessed to being Vane's instrument. "What I should have done 20 years ago," he said, drawing his pistol and checking the cylinder. "I'm making a stand." But as Carson and his men thundered into the yard, their guns already drawn, Silas realized that he might have just signed all their death warrants. Carson reined in his horse, stopping 20 feet from the porch. His 2 companions flanked him in a practiced formation. The scar on his face seemed even more grotesque in the harsh morning light, and his hand rested casually on his gun, as if he had performed this deadly dance countless times before. "Morning, Thorne," Carson called out, his voice oozing with false cheerfulness. "I trust you've had a productive conversation with Mrs. Patterson here?" Silas kept his gun low but ready. The conversation's over. You can ride back and tell Vane the message was delivered." "Oh, but that's not quite right, is it?" Carson's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You see, Mr. Vane wanted to ensure that there were no misunderstandings about the terms. Sometimes folks need a demonstration of what happens when debts go unpaid." From behind him, Silas heard the front door creak as Martha and Thomas sought refuge inside the house. Good. But the walls of that old farmhouse wouldn't stop bullets if this situation escalated. "The debt's not legitimate," Silas stated, his voice firm. $50 for medicine doesn't magically become $200 just because Vane says so. Carson laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're talking about law, Thorne. But out here, Vane is the law. He owns the sheriff, the judge, and half the town council. Who's going to argue with him?" One of Carson's men, a hulking brute with lifeless eyes, spoke for the first time. "Enough talk. Let's burn the barn and be done with it." "Now that's the spirit, Dutch," Carson agreed. "Mrs. Patterson needs to understand that resistance has consequences. And our friend Silas here needs to understand what happens when employees don't follow orders." Silas felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. 3 against 1 were already unfavorable odds, but it was compounded by the fact that innocent people were caught in the crossfire. "There's another way," Silas said, stalling for time, hoping for a miracle. "Let them keep the farm. I'll work for Vane for 2 months instead of 1. Double the time for double the debt." Carson considered this, tilting his head like a curious bird. A generous offer. But you see, this isn't really about the money anymore. It's about setting an example. About showing the folks in Dustfield what happens when they think they can defy Cornelius Vane. The third man had remained silent until now, but Silas noticed that he had subtly positioned himself to the side of the house, attempting a flanking maneuver. They weren't here to collect a debt. They were here to issue a statement, written in blood and ashes. "Besides," Carson continued, his eyes narrowing with malicious intent, "word is you've grown rather attached to that little blonde dove you rescued yesterday. Shame if something were to happen to her while you're out here playing the hero." The threat slammed into Silas like a physical blow. They had left someone watching Mercy. She was alone at his ranch, unprotected, likely assuming he would return by noon. If he didn't return, if he died here trying to protect the Pattersons. "If you're planning to take that girl, you can forget it." Thomas Patterson's voice boomed from the doorway. So, what started as a story of debt and desperation in Dustfield ultimately became a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, the heavy cost of atonement, and the surprising places where redemption can be found. Silas, a man haunted by his past, chooses to risk everything, facing down his inner demons and external threats, to offer a lifeline to Mercy, a young woman trapped in a cycle of exploitation. It's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, compassion and courage can ignite, offering a glimmer of hope against seemingly insurmountable odds. And it shows us that sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones within ourselves. What did you think of Silas's choice? Do you think he made the right decision? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own perspectives, ask any questions that came to mind, or just let me know what resonated with you most about this story. Let's get a conversation going. And if you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be sharing more captivating stories, analyses, and explorations of the human condition, so you won't want to miss out. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.